Pat would like to welcome to our series Healthcare Innovation Lessons Learned, David Nickelson. David is a senior partner and consulting lead in health and life sciences at Randstad Digital, as well as a health and behavior change subject matter expert. David holds both the JD and the Doctor of Psychology degree and has 30 years plus experience in scientific, clinical, legal, and digital worlds. His passion is partnering with companies to develop and deliver solutions to many of healthcare's most challenging problems. So, David, welcome to PAC's On the Record, Off the Record Lessons Learned series.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here and excited to have a conversation with, I believe, people who are probably even deeper in some of the delivery or in the work directly in the spaces that they work than I am. And most of you are probably smarter than. That's always the best part of these kinds of conversations. Just pleased to be here and looking forward to talking to folks both on the record and off the record.
David, I glossed over your bona fides in the intro, but I'd really like you to give us some insights into your journey into applied behavior change at the institutional level, with the corporate level that you are in now, and what led you down this path. Did you start at that level? Did you start thinking about it from individuals? So just give us a little bit of your background.
Farm boy from Minnesota. Shout out to Eric and a few of the other Minnesotans I see on the call. So good to see friends and folks from back the way. I went off to undergrad in psychology, went off to do a dual degree program because I was very interested in human behavior, but also interested in law and policy. And I was interested in changing the world like many of the folks who go into the different areas that they go into as they work their way into college and such. As I worked my way through the 2 degrees, I earned them together. So it was a combined program. One of the big insights that came from the particular sets of leaders I was lucky enough to work with in this space was that psychology is the study and application of human behavior principles. And law or other regulated systems is really a structuring of human behavior to either encourage or discourage different kinds of behavior. And the assumptions that the law makes, because they come from policy, legislation, regulation, conversations, compromise, may not necessarily always match up with what the science or the applied activities in healthcare or in psychology say about the way people behave. And that disconnect fascinated me. And that's been the cornerstone of every place that I've gone in my career. My dissertation work was actually on health plan choice and how consumers choose healthcare plans. And this was back, I won't even tell you the dates because it's so long ago, where I discovered some of the network theory that Rand was doing, which is now mainstream. I bumped up against some financial models in psychology that were being developed at the time, nothing like, Kahneman and Tversky and some of those guys and some of what we've seen. But I was lucky enough to sense there was something there in the space, and that has been my focus. And so when I was told the only thing I could do was either go be a lawyer, be a psychologist in practice, or be a professor, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So I ended up taking a congressional science fellowship and working in Congress on technology policy. And again, dumb luck, I was right place, right time, and ended up writing most of the originating telehealth and telemedicine legislation for the Medicare program in the late 90s to get that industry started. And so have stayed involved in some capacity of applied behavior change, applied technology, applied legal and regulatory systems to try to make things better in whatever space that I can, and ended up working across different businesses where much of the marketing that I encountered and the outreach and communications was certainly not consistent with some of what we know about the way people communicate or the way that psychology could help them. So I dabbled there. I've dabbled in, developing healthcare related platforms and tools to change behavior at the sort of disease level, and learned to understand that. I've worked in corporate change and helping organizations change at the leadership level and otherwise. So I have been lucky enough to be able to go where my muse takes me as I'm interested. And that sort of fundamental grasp of one being the application of scientific principles and the other being the sort of way that we structure human behavior systems. It can play in almost any arena, in almost any industry that has regulatory structures around it. And you can tell a good story and make an impact by pointing out those disconnects, looking for ways to resolve those disconnects, and helping systems work faster, more efficiently, better, at whatever kind of outcome it is that is the agreed upon set of outcomes at the beginning.
That's fascinating. So you've done work down at the personal behavior change level, really designing systems to do that. Both Mary Beth and I have a lot of experience designing and building companies that are about that, how to help people better manage chronic disease conditions or stave off chronic conditions. And Mary Beth, I'm sure you have a lot of questions too. So I'll open this up to you as well. But the one question I thought of early on was like, is there a difference or what are the similarities between how you engender behavior change at the individual level and how that you use those same tools or techniques, for example, at the institutional level. So are there similarities? One, and then two, because you're talking about application on one and sort of systems on the other, what are some of the major differences between how you approach an individual behavior change versus an institution?
One of the, and again, I think it may be unique to my training, and some might say it's a liability, some might say it's a strength. I was lucky enough in my undergraduate work to have done well enough that I could take most of the graduate courses in learning and motivation as an undergrad. So I moved into hardcore behaviorist, Skinnerian kinds of theory, where the assumption is always that there's no squishiness in there. Every action has something that prompts it and something that rewards it or diminishes it, and that you can run your whole life like that and understand all human beings simply through that sort of reinforcement. My graduate work was all in much more dynamic psychotherapy and applied work where, working with, and these words are a little outdated, I know, but I'll use them just because I think they help people make sense. Looking at neuroticism, looking at anxiety, looking at depression, both from a scientific standpoint, but also from the experiential side. And what does it take experientially to move someone through a disease state and help them, the all objective reality is just agreed upon subjective reality. All right. How do you help someone change that version of the way that they're seeing the world and get them to shift into a new place where it can be helpful for them to deal with the disease or to deal with a problem or to deal with a challenge or a relationship issue. And that piece of both the emotional, the social, and the scientific has been this triad that I have constantly looked for the balance between. And one of the things that I think is, I will say it's both similar and different. But what's similar is that the unconscious, subconscious, you can call it whatever you want. You don't even have to believe in it if you don't want to, and I'm fine with that. It is clear that in a gap in communication or in a gap in understanding or in a gap of time where there is no activity, people fill in the gap with whatever is happening in their own head. Again, that sort of subjective reality gets inserted into that vacuum. And I always tell my team that fear abhors a vacuum. And so if people are fearful or anxious or whatever it is that is the scariest thing in their life or in their organization will be what they insert into that gap to fill it. And that might sound a little too Freudian for some folks or a little too dynamic, but it's a very real thing. And if you are lucky enough to be someone who can work between both the scientific and that sort of almost id-like thinking that happens in human beings when they are trying to put things together and they don't have information, they have fear, they have all those other biological systems moving at really high speed, you have the ability then to recognize, oh, here are the kinds of things that people might be filling this in with. Or here's where the words that you chose as a leader or as an individual, talking about yourself, talking about your spouse, or talking about your organization, were ill-chosen potentially because here are the kinds of things that might prompt in their activities and in their thinking about change that will make them more resistant or more willing to be interested in the change, to support the change. The old Kaplan-esque sort of change theory was one that just basically said, if you just put enough communication out there about why this is important and valuable and why they need to do it, they're all going to jump on board at some point. You're just going to bombard them with what is it? Now we've got it hidden 9 times, I guess the advertisers are telling us, and they're just going to buy it. We've learned long ago that's truly not the case, but having a mechanism for being able to do that is hard. And I think that fundamental tension between what people learn and think and cognitize versus what they feel or what social systems can tell them. My team knows I'm right in the middle of Nexus, the book by Yuval, the guy who wrote Sapiens, and his concepts about information. Again, they trace back to a lot of what was going on with random network theory and other things that information is actually a communication and it's a social communication. And I think that's also intuitively been part of what I do. I don't say it as nicely or as well organized as he does, but that's been a part of it. To me, understanding that tension between what they're actually thinking, the fact that they're often irrational about what they're thinking, even when you give them all the facts or you line that all up and that irrationality still feels rational to them. Go back to Dan Ariely and some of the rational irrational. That piece has just been a fundamental part of understanding in both cases, but it's differently applied. In an individual, you're tackling specific cognitions, specific feelings, and specific situations. When you're working with a team, you've got power dynamics, and you have to take that leadership team and understand how those things are working for them and how it plays out. And then at the enterprise level, now you're starting to look at all the forces that are inside of an organization and then all the forces that are outside, market forces, and the way that they absorb and understand and process outside forces. Some people see a burning platform and say, yeah, hurrah, let's go get it. Other people see a burning platform and say, where's my resume?
Wow. That's amazing and impressive. And it's just, again, for those of us who've attempted to innovate inside of healthcare, just being able to have someone articulate that entire side. It's like individually it's hard enough to promote behavior change, to do something different. But then you're saying it goes into this leadership levels. There's all these power dynamics and how that's set up. And then you get to a larger organization and how does it fit together? And then you're at an institutional level and it's like a major healthcare system that's a full stack delivery service and so many different competing interests inside of there. So how do you start to break through at that level? We're looking at, for example, the promise of AI. Let's bring it to something
Mm-hmm.
specific. The promise of artificial intelligence applied across, and we've had a couple of on the record sessions about this already from a clinician's perspective, from an institutional perspective, and a innovator's perspective. There's all these different ways that AI could be used to reduce the burden on staff, allow them to do a better job of practicing at the top of their license because we're taking away some of these fundamentally rote tasks that a computer could do better, right? There's ways that both Mary Beth and I have experimented with and produced companies on, which is how do we put tools in the hand of customers, consumers, so they can do a better job of tracking their own stuff, change their behavior at that level, and then reap that benefit back into the health system, which means we've got more compliant patients who are taking their meds on time, therefore lowering costs, right? So there's that level of AI. But then, listening to our last speaker guest who was talking about this from an institutional level, it's like, how do you even start to push a mindset that we need to experiment, we need to think this through, we need to pick at that level? Like, what are the obstacles you come into, and how do you approach helping institutions who say want to do something get there in some relative amount of quick time?
And that is central to almost everything that my team is doing right now in many different spaces. I'll use an example. We're in the process of helping do a rip and replace, if you will, of a product or a project-led mindset inside of a large health payer to a product-led operating model. That is a fundamental different way of thinking about the work, organizing the work, structuring the work. You're doing it with all the legal and regulatory frameworks around the folks that scare them. You have all of the clinical and other considerations that are part of it. It is a morass of activities that a lot of people are scared of. It usually starts, and we are currently Randstad Digital, and I've worked at digital agencies and other places where digital is central to the work. It usually starts with digital. There is this belief that if we can just line up the data and the systems that use the data and the processes that analyze the data, we can fix all sorts of things with that much of a linear approach. It will be that straightforward and that easy. We all know that it's not. What happens, I think, is the technology people make that promise. And this is not to pick on them. It's part of the future and what we do. But I think wrapped around that, we're analog beings and digital is not. Digital can change as fast as it can change. We can't. And so that lag is always the problem. So we can invent a new system, a new way of approaching the work, but getting other people to say, hey, I have to expend energy to learn this. I have to expend energy to try this. I have to expend energy to make this be effective. And I have to be able to get comfortable enough with this that it's actually going to generate business value, whatever that is. We foundationally, and this is probably my biggest learning across all of the years, is starting with a statement of value that leadership can align to and that you can go in and get leadership to align to is just, it's central to success. Trying to back into that is so hard. And the get a process for actually sitting down and spending 2 hours with a leadership team and saying, all right, what are the top business values? And when I say business values, I'm not talking just revenue or just margin. I'm talking about, if you're in the room with a payer, you've got the chief medical officer in there. You've got the chief nursing officer in there. You've got all the folks who are doing pre-auths and all of those things, along with the CFO and all of his team. And you've got all of IT in there as well. Those leaders are in that room trying to align, and their interests are very different in many cases. You have to find that alignment and have the conversation across all the different language systems, all the different knowledge systems, all the tribal approaches that each one of those groups take, and be able to weave that into a story that they will all, or most, will at least sign up for and say, yeah, okay, I can agree with that. You've taken my interest into consideration and part of how we're going to address this. You see what my team needs. We can do that. We often talk about, when I say business value back to our clients, it could be a clinical value. It could just be engagement, if that's what you want. It could just be, faster rev cycle. It could just be that you want to have everybody giving you positive SAT scores at the end of an engagement. But if there isn't alignment from anybody at the top, that's the case, or that you haven't been able to enter a system where the level of authority and impact is high enough that they're going to be able to drive that forward, the success is so, so hard. And we combine user experience writ large, patient, provider, employee experience in a system. We weave together all of the different components of change management, but not your father's change management. This is really informed by anthropology, psychology, sociology, and it has a full set of metrics and measures that follows along. And then we tie that up with all the different parts of product, agile, save. And that's our universe, with technology as a foundational tool to drive that. But a big piece of it that we always enter with is this organizational alignment first. Because if you can't get that and you can't get it high enough, it is really hard to change. You can get a business unit to change, but they're going to interact with a system. And that system is going to tell them, you don't have enough power, you don't have enough authority, and we don't have to change because we're bigger than you are. And on an unconscious level, they know they can win. They'll just let them grind themselves to a halt. You'll see great measures and outcomes for your particular project, and then it'll get shelved when somebody at a leadership level says, yeah, but that's a pain in the ass.
David, can I ask you a couple of questions to dig into these points a little bit? So the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about aligning leadership around value statement is that, especially now, especially with AI, Gen AI, other emerging technologies, the pace of change is quicker. So what may have been an exciting statement to rally around a year ago, 6 months ago, no longer has broad support. And so this is also something that I've experienced, where you do the hard work of getting alignment on an evidence-based and logical business case supported approach. And then the leadership team changes. So my question that I'm getting to is, are there any, insights you have or best practices you've seen work to kind of ensure alignment despite all the changes going on in an organization, outside of an organization? And then my second question, while it may not seem aligned, it is around this idea of working towards a vision that is positive for payers and providers, or providers and patients, but ideally like some sort of patient centric positive outcome. What do you see as actually working? Because the way the system is designed, the financial incentives in the healthcare system today, it's not designed to necessarily improve patient outcomes or benefit patients. So I'm wondering if you have an example of applied behavior change that's been adopted at an organizational level that has really moved the needle in a big way for patient outcomes.
I'll go back to the payer example that's probably top of mind, just because I think it's one of the most interesting ones we've done in the most recent case. The mandate coming into the conversation from the CIO who brought us in was that he needed to find X hundreds of millions of dollars in savings in order for them simply to operate the way that they needed to operate. And this was a piece of that effort. And so he had a financial goal at the other side of it, but he also had some efficiency goals that he wanted to see earned and obtained. And using that effort to using those numbers as a way to say, all right, here's what we have to point at. We have to point at some efficiency gains. We have to point at some organizational adoption gains, because if this is going to be a rip and replace, we have to pull those things into it. And we have to be aware of some of the changes that are happening in the regional competitive marketplace, because ultimately those are the things that they're going to have to be responsive to on the other side. And the approach that we find works very well is to set up a center of excellence, or put a capability inside of the organization and coach that into its ownership of that kind of change and that kind of change process, and be able to address all of the different pieces that are changing, either in the marketplace or in the organization. Because no doubt that number that was supposed to be coming in savings ultimately will change in 6 months as the board finds something else, or something else happens in the local marketplace. One of the ways we encourage clients, we can't always get them to do it. One of the ways that we encourage clients is that, look, leadership, this actually has to be a touch point for you. This focus on value needs to be revisited regularly. And if you're going to encourage the rest of this organization to actually have a sort of agile mindset, you have to model that and demonstrate that, and be, the kind of leader who can say with some level of authenticity and humbleness, hey guys, I don't know that's working that direction. The world changed and we've got to change. And so here's where we are going to do that. And we will talk honestly with the rest of the organization about it. I think that's really hard for leaders. I think it's really easy to, with everything that they have to face. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone else. Truly, you get a plan in place and you think that is the plan, and God, you just want to run that plan and execute that plan, and you don't want to tweak it and change it and move the needles and the dials all of the time, because it takes extra energy and extra time. And that taking more time at the same time that something like AI is rapidly giving people the idea, in some cases it's only the idea, in some cases it's actual gains, that there are places that they could either be replaced or that work could be made more efficient and more effective. It's really uncertain. And so it's moving faster, and it's asking and demanding change in the organization faster than the organization can change. And ultimately, if the organization has to tweak the dials every 6 months, even that feels like it slows the process down, or it's hard for people to get it. Holding this growth change mindset in front of everybody is hard. We're not biologically built to do that. We're not. We're built to maintain homeostasis and use as little energy as we can. When we are asked constantly to use more energy to change and think different, that's hard. And I think it's hard to build that into an organizational culture and into an organizational dynamic, because it's not in keeping with much of what the market asks for from corporations, particularly ones that are publicly traded. It is speed and growth and value. And the faster you can get to that is a higher value, I think, than perhaps the ability of the organization to change around it. It's just not the case. I don't know if I answered your question, though. I think I touched on it, but I don't think I got all of it.
So centers of excellence, and I guess my takeaway, which I guess you confirm, is that entities outside of payer organizations or large health system can't really affect the change. So I'm coming at it from our startup mindset, and an outside innovator without some sort of internal entity that is committed at like a center of excellence, there's just a lot of risk, right? It's unlikely to maintain the course of commitment that was set up.
Yes. I think that's absolutely right. I think it's really hard for anyone to externally enter and change without partnering in a really strong way.
Yeah.
And also being willing to, help work alongside the organization, fail with them. We do that. We will fail. We have failed with organizations where we've given the suggestion, we've gone in, and we all got hammered because there was something nobody anticipated. But again, and maybe this is just the psychologist in me, but our bias and mine throughout my career has always been, I don't want to be a consultant who sticks around for 100 years. I want to be somebody who helps you solve the problem, teaches you the skills that you need, watches you work with those skills independently, and then can step away and watch you try to take ownership, if you will, of that piece of your life, of your organization, of your work. And my wife, who's a far better clinician than I, she leads a good sized mental health practice here. That's the after you do group therapy with a group for 8 weeks or 9 weeks, often then you set up a touch point with that entire group, 3 months or 6 months in cycles to say, hey, did this stick? Did this still work? Is this still the case? And that's good. That's good, sound therapeutic intervention if you can get either the patient or the insurance company to pay for it. I think is the same thing for organizations, going back with your center of excellence and saying to leadership, hey, these are the last time we touched on directives and value and goals. Are we still there? Does this need to change? And if so, how? And then how are we going to communicate it so that everybody in the organization can make that change in a fast way and an effective way, and we won't exhaust them with endless change?